So in the end, because I was so overwhelmed by my spreadsheet, I felt like if I just showed the spreadsheet, it wasn't gonna work, right? Like people who get overwhelmed by like words and lists and things like that, that they were gonna have a problem. So I made the map. The map is rudimentary at best because I am not a coder, right? Like I can dabble in a website, I can use a plugin, whatever. The map is pretty cumbersome and it was a very tedious process, like pulling that in. But my goal was really to give this visual so people could understand that these police projects are not limited, right? It's not like one or two places, it's not like a certain area of the country. It's literally everywhere but those three states that are yellow. Um, and I think there's been some like I've been, first of all, this thing has gone way like outside of me. Like you do something and it never occurs to you that like people are going to pay attention to what you do until people start paying attention to what you do. And I'm a little blown away by how many people have seen this thing, right? This thing that like I was like, let me just make a map and put up flags so people could understand how extensive this thing is. Um, Look at see, Hiram, you should stop B teaming me and you would know. so so the map itself is color coded. If it's yellow, there's nothing going on that I could find in that state. And let me first say, this is not extensive because since this thing got released, I've gotten notes about, well, this is happening in my area. Did you know about this? If it's gold or orange, it was approved for construction but hasn't started. If it's green, it means that they're getting going. They're trying to plan it, but nothing. They're not even as far as like being ready to start construction as the orange ones are. If it's red, it's already under construction. They've broken ground in some way. They've done something so that you can be aware that like it's going. And then if it's purple, there are multiple projects happening in that state that are different levels between it's already opened, it's under construction, it's planning, whatever have you. But for me, this was really like jarring to kind of see it all laid out visually this way because it just did not occur to me that it was this extensive until I started poking around. And I guess in a way I shouldn't be surprised that this is like what's happening, right? Like we shouldn't be shocked that this national police state is being built, but people need to be aware that this national police state is being built. And I think one of the questions that I've been getting is like, how did you find this stuff? And honestly, it's like sheer nosiness and due diligence, right? Like if I got an inkling that something was happening in a state, I just Googled every term that I could Google associated with a police facility. So police department, safety, training, public safety training, police training, and that state until I determined if something came up. I started, and I don't even remember how long ago this was, Jared, that I showed that first spreadsheet when it was 47 places. And while I was going through to kind of confirm those 47 places, like I type in like Dallas, Texas, police training facility, and El Paso pops up. And I'm like, well, where the hell did El Paso come from? I didn't have El Paso on my list. Well, turns out there's one in El Paso that's also being considered. So that's how I went from 47 to 60. It was like 66. And, my head started hurting. And then I found out about Philly and about Lacey, because as people found out that this presentation was coming, they were like hitting me up like, hey, did you know that this one was coming and happening in this area? Um, but it's, it's a labor to find this stuff out, and it's intentionally made to be a labor to find this stuff out, right? Like, they don't want people to understand how extensive this is, right? They don't want you to know that in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which when most people think of Hershey, Pennsylvania, they're thinking of the amusement park and chocolate and da 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 da. And they're not thinking about the 366,000 square foot facility being built on 136 acres, right? Like, and it's already under construction. And I got a note from somebody that was like, what do you mean I live 10 minutes from there? That can't be possible. And I was like, no, for real, here's the source. Like, check it out. And then they were like, how did this even happen? And it's because these things are all, for the most part, happening locally, right? Like, these are local decisions. There are a few places where I've seen like they got federal funding, or it's going to be a shared facility for military use, that type of thing. But it is, I mean, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of information, and I don't want to give myself too much credit because I can't imagine that there's no one else who like thought to look at this stuff. But I've never seen it all pulled together like in one space. And my intention really was to kind of have people look at a map and be like, holy shit, like all of this is happening, so that we, as people who are paying attention and people who are organizers and people who are interested in trying to figure out how do you combat this police state that we're living in, that's growing, right, day by day, so you can be aware that there may be something you need to pay attention to. And what I'm seeing a lot of is there's, and it brought me back to our conversation with Imani, where like people are coming out in some places and like, we don't want this thing. Like, I don't want this thing to be built near my house. I don't want a shooting range. It's going to create, all kinds of environmental issues, all these things. And the response is simply like, okay, well, we'll figure out another way to do it. You don't want to pay, you don't want to vote the bond through? No problem. We'll find money somewhere else. You don't want it next to your house? No problem. We have 2 other locations where we can put it. So it's going to take some real like.
And then, as you point out, they said they don't even care that even if people don't want it, here's 50 million for one anyway.
Right. So the map is free. Like, it's not behind any kind of paywall or anything. I basically built a page into my really like rarely used website that I kind of have, just so when things that come in, I can, post it. Speaking of which, I don't think I actually added that graphic about you coming to Jersey. I need to make sure I put that up there. So, that's usually what I use the space for. It's like my random thoughts. There's a link to my Substack, which I very rarely write on, like things like that. But I wanted there to be like a central space that people could go to and, kind of follow what's happening. But there's a lot of information missing. The money needs to be followed, because I feel like you always have to follow the money. But I didn't have the time or the mental capacity to do that kind of dive. But I've had a few people reach out who are researchers and who are, doing different projects in different places. And we're going to try and combine minds and see like, what can we do to like expand this little bit that I've put together to, more useful information. The police associations that are behind these things, there's a lot of them. And it's just, I'm one person, and I simply don't have the capacity to do it all. So I'm really hoping that I can bring a bunch of people in that can help.
So,
the link,
go ahead.
The link is in the show description. I just added it to the map, and where people can follow to your website and everything, and contact you if they find gaps or having additional information or whatever. So yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I'm sorry, Geechee, but real quick, I gotta just remind everybody one more negative association or appropriate association with the name Hershey, state senator here in Maryland. Hershey was one of the prime opponents to our effort to unionize. And he was the one that said to our faces, "You aren't mine workers. What do academics need unions for?"
Why do you need collective bargaining?
You're not in the mine. You're not in the fields. Like, yeah. And then you'd be concerned about us? Is that what you're saying, Senator Hershey? Like, because they're like them, you're over there advocating for their rights and union rights. Is that what you're saying? The real laborers, everybody but us, is what you're saying, or is it just across the board and you find any excuse that fits the current?
Wild.
But yeah, so
no, I was gonna say, so
ahead, yeah.
we are doing some research on Cop City here, and just I guess from a larger perspective in Atlanta. But the connection to Israel, and then so I would love to share some of the things that we're finding there, and then obviously I'm going to use some of that shit that you have right there because that's important. But so a couple things. I wonder how strategic was the placement of those sites. Have you saw anything in terms of why? Like, for instance, I know here there's just a lot of contradictions in terms of why and where, and then like the ecological impact, obviously like economic impact, and then the demographics of those areas. So like, was there some strategy that you've been picking up on the placement of each one and each state, and then maybe why not a Wyoming, which I think I used to hear some stuff about Cheyenne, Wyoming being some type of a city to where if the U.S. was under attack, it'll be one of the cities that
remember, that's where the white folks are with the guns to stand against the police.
I know.
And the federal government. So they probably sitting out there like, I wish a motherfucker would try to build.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, Renee, did you see any like particular placements of like why these specific areas?
You might as well also, Renee, just sorry, this question seems to fit with what you're being asked here.
Yeah.
What are they preparing for? Why are they doing this? And I don't think that's a stupid question at all.
Not at all. So what sent me down, and I realized that when I first posted the page, like it was just a map in the spreadsheet, and I didn't actually give it any explanations like why I did what I did and how I got there. So I went through and like actually wrote out my methodology and all these things. And so back in like the fall of 21, I saw a post from Kamau about what was happening in Atlanta. And I reached out to him and I was like, look, I live in New Jersey. I don't know like how useful I can be in New Jersey, but what can people who are outside of Georgia do to be of assistance to what you all are doing down there? And so, Jared, I don't even know if you know this story. This is how I ended up around y'all. So Kamau answered and he was like, well, why don't you do a panel? And so, once you trigger me to say like, do this thing that's going to be useful, I'm like, let's go. So within like 2 months, we hosted a panel and it was online, and it was Atan Thomas and your boy, Otis Campbell from Syracuse University. And Kamau, and we talked about like what was happening in Atlanta and how it got there and all the things that I felt like I certainly didn't know. And I felt like people needed to have some understanding of like, how is this thing happening? Like, how did we even get to this place? So since then, I've been following the story along, and I'll never forget on Black Power Media, Jackie one time was talking about Atlanta, and she was like, I feel like people always wait for like something bad to happen before they jump on to like complain about something. And we need to not wait for something bad to happen in Atlanta. And then fast forward like 6 to 8 months and Tortuguita gets killed in a forest, right? And I remember posting and saying, Jackie called it, like she said, don't wait for something to happen before we kind of fight this. So I've been following this for now, like 2 years and change. And I personally feel like 2020 was a trigger for the state. And I think part of that trigger was recognizing that there was a line that the state could cross that would cause a cross section of working people to stand together and be like, oh, no, 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 no. We're not doing this, right? And for all the history that had happened, St. Louis and, Staten Island and all the places where police were killing people, right? Like, this was not new, but there was something specifically triggering about how George Floyd was killed, I think, right? Like, in my mind, there was something about the way it happened, with all the people standing around and saying, you're going to kill him, you're going to kill him, you're going to kill him. Like, there was something about that triggered the population. And the result of that trigger of people coming out in masses, not just here, but across the world, right? And people in this country seeing that people in other parts of the world were catching on to what was happening with racist police violence here in this country. And all of a sudden, police would show up to fight a crowd, and it wouldn't just be Black people like screaming at the police. There were also white people standing at the front line and being like, no, you're not coming for them, because we're also here, like, presenting this united front that this is not okay. And so what I think that triggered was this kind of like, okay, so how are we going to prevent this from ever happening again, right? How are we going to set up something in place so that if these fools think that they're going to try and rise up against the state, we have things already in place to kind of shut it down. So now you have, like, now protesters can't block the street. If you get hit by a car as a protester, that's okay. RICO charges for handing out pamphlets. Like, the state is coming from all directions to try and prevent a mass uprising from happening again. So this is my estimation, right? Now, I will admit that I have not, and it's probably something I should do. I should probably look from like 2017, from after Michael Brown, to 2020 to see how many facilities were under construction or built or whatever during that time frame, to see if it's a similar number, right? Because Kamau, when we talk about it, says to me sometimes, like, I don't know that 2020 was the mark. I think maybe 2017 was the mark. And he could be right. Like, I haven't gone back far enough.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I thought,
no, it's good.
Why do I think that was 2015? I got something out of order here. Was it?
It could be me. Don't get me wrong.
When was Trayvon killed? Now I'm getting it all confused. Mike Brown was 2014. Yeah, that's what I thought it was earlier.
Sorry.
Because I actually agreed with Kamau, and it was killing me. First of all, you're killing me again. First of all, you're now saying that Kamau was responsible for bringing you to the platform. And
you sure was. You sure was.
I'm about to leave. And then I'm on there agreeing with him again, because I think he was right when he said the inflection point was probably Mike Brown before before we even got to Floyd. And then now, yeah, we're on our way. We're on our way to beef. It's like all this Kamau praise and the fact that I'm in agreement with him so often is starting to get on my nerves. This is like becoming a problem.
Well, remember the first time we met on screen, Jared, you were like, wait a minute. You're the
Oh, right. Okay. But the Kamau credit is what is I don't know if I had put that together.
Kamau invited me to the remix. He was the
Well, goddamn. So yeah, but then he was but yeah, I thought he was right on that. And
Right. So I
yeah.
think that's an interesting thing that should be looked at, right? Like, is it further back than what I think? And do we have even more of these facilities if you go back to 2017 than what I think, right? Now, in Atlanta specifically, in 2019 in Atlanta, there was a city plan, right? And in the city plan, Wilani Forest was set to remain as a green space. This was part of the city plan. It was the lungs of Atlanta. They were going to use it to teach about, they were going to have like science classes, and the community was going to come in, and like there was literally an entire plan that had no mention at all of tearing out 85 acres of the forest to become this facility. And it was after they killed Rayshon Brooks, and after the Atlanta Police Foundation gave like bonuses to the police department after that happened, right? In response to, the 2020 response in Atlanta, that all of a sudden now, like, people were concerned about, well, we don't want the police to be upset, right? We want to make sure that our Atlanta officers feel supported. And then this group, which had been really in the background, like the Atlanta Police Foundation is not new. They were trying their best to kind of get their hooks in, from what I can tell, dating back to like the early 2000s, trying to figure out how to navigate and really, have a stronger foothold in the city. And that crux of like 2020 gave, and wanting the Atlanta police to feel supported, gave a reason to move forward with this massive facility. So, so again, like it's definitely something that if I can wrap my head around doing another rabbit hole, like going back to those years and seeing what I could find. But I just, I don't know. I could be, again, my hypothesis of 2020 could be wrong. Regarding what Gishi asked about the locations, there are some interesting plots. If you look at Washington, it literally goes up and down the state of Washington. And those 4 facilities are trained for the facilities. The ones, Lacey is one big project. And then there are 4 other separate facilities that are 2 are, in the works, and 2 have already opened. One opened last December and the other one opened in January of this year. And the plan from the governor was, we need to do regional training locations. Like we need to, but I'm like, you need all of this to train folks? And they're like very, very proud of how many officers have already gone through 2 of those locations that just opened, right? So I think that's interesting. I think it being in California, right on the coast, is interesting. I think the fact that there are 3 locations that are surrounding Minneapolis is interesting, right? Like it literally like creates a triangle around Minneapolis. I think that Georgia, while everyone was looking at Georgia, that I think it's open already. The one that's next door. in what's the name of the county? Can you highlight that flag? Because then I can't remember what the name of it in Georgia.
That Clemson one is
Gwinnett County, right? Like 48,000 square feet, right? And that's under construction, right? Like that's one of the things that they're trying to plot for. So I'm just trying to, I don't know. I can't say 100% like that every location has a reason for it, but I suspect that they're all strategically placed in order to make sure that if they have to send out law enforcement en masse to a certain location, that it can be easily achieved. And I think that's why the middle of the country is so scarce. It's so scarce because there's just not a whole lot of Black people in the middle of the country.
And to what extent,
Yeah.
so far, to what extent have you found federal fund? Because I was wondering, are they trying to set this up like the way they set up the military industrial complex, where every state is almost
has a military.
It's possible.
has
So
a component or wants a piece of that big bag that's being offered. If hey, we don't have money for schools, but you want a cop city, we got millions.
And some of these places, it's a school building that they've repurposed.
Oh, that's
or torn down. To build this thing, right?
Yeah.
And get rid of a few more of those hospitals too, and repurpose them.
Right.
And
sorry, go ahead, Geisha. Go ahead, and then I'll answer Jared's question.